Hi, this is Lindsay Kennedy Wood from Down Syndrome Queensland. I'm the education consultant. On the screen you will see my contact details should you wish to contact me via email or phone. Today we are talking about transitions. So the Oxford Dictionary defines a transition as the process or period of change from one state of or condition to another. And basically it's to change, move, adapt and adjust. So within an environment in the education system, it can be things like your first experience or exposure to formal education, like kindy and prep. It can be moving around the school from classroom to classroom, going from the library back to the classroom, or going to music or that type of thing, or playground to back into the classroom. Going from one year to the next, going from one grade to the next, changing teachers, or the big one of moving from primary school to secondary school. So a lot of students struggle with transitions in one way or another, whether it's just through uncertainty, a lack of understanding, anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, sensory issues and overload, or just non-compliance. If we aren't going to be intentional about the way that we go about instigating a transition, we're more likely to encounter problem behaviour, meltdowns, tantrums, escapism like running, or just subtle behaviours like being distracting and whining or whinging. So today we're going to discuss transitions from many different angles and in various situations. Some of it will apply to you, some of it won't, so feel free to skip to the parts that do apply to you or jump over the parts that don't. If you have certain questions, then you can always feel free to email me. So all transitions, whether within a school or to school, need to be considered carefully to ensure that all students understand expectations, process, and purpose. We need to be consistent and intentional about the way that we go about starting and following through with a transition. We need to expect the best and expect competency. So we need to avoid the mentality of low expectations. We need to begin scaffolding our expectations and give regular assistance to that student and then remove it slowly. We don't want them to become reliant upon the scaffolds that we put in place. Once they've shown competence, we remove them so that we're building their independence. We need them to make an error. We need them to be able to make an error and know that it's okay. We all make mistakes in life. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. No one is. So what we do is we allow them to make the error. We might spend some time reteaching the right way to do something, and then we let them go again. We want to include visuals as much as possible. Children with Down syndrome, as well as 65% of our population, require visuals. It's the best way for them to learn. So things like social stories, visual cues, reminders are really beneficial, especially in transition times as well. And it's really important that, if you're a parent, you know your child inside out, but that as teachers and non-contact teachers and maybe even admin staff, that they understand and know the child. They know the child medically, behaviourally, academically. And for parents, this is best done through things like helping build vision statements and handing them to schools, or teachers using things like student profiles, so that, if they're passing the students off to another teacher, they can hand the student profile to the new teacher so that they get an overview or a snapshot of the student. But the one thing to remember is that as much as possible, we want to create independence in our students. Once we've walked them through something a couple of times, we need to step back and let them have a go, remembering that it's okay for them to make a mistake or to do the wrong thing, or that type of thing. They may require some prompting or some conversations or a revision of the social story, but eventually it would be hoped that all scaffolding can be removed from the student and they can go about their activities as expected independence. We need to remember that independence is the right for personal freedom, the right to make choices about one's own life. It gives them opportunities to succeed to the best of their ability and desires. It gives them the opportunities to make mistakes and realize that it's okay and to learn from the situation. It builds self-esteem and the belief that they have control over their life. And it starts with people believing they are capable and that you have a hope and a desire for all the students in your care. So that's just a little overview about all the transitions. So today we're going to specifically look at 4 areas. We're going to look at the transition to formal education. So this is things that parents can do to ensure that their children are as ready as possible to go to school. Within the school, this is things that teachers can do to help students to develop the expectations and understand the reasoning behind transitions around the school. The third thing we'll look at is the between the grades, so between year levels, different teachers and stuff. So these are steps to help students understand what change is going to happen and build relationships with their future teacher. And then number 4 is to secondary school. Unfortunately, this is an area that can make and break our students. If we don't have successful transition students to secondary school, statistics show us that they're likely to end up in either homeschooled, not schooled, or in special schooled, which in turn affects their long-term lives. So we're going to go through that quite a bit as well. During the presentation or during this webinar, there's going to be lots of visuals and documents that we have created. These are all available on our website for download. So just head to downsyndromeqld.org.au to get a copy. They're all free. But we can't release any pictures of documents with student pictures on it. So that's for obvious reasons. They're just there to give an example. All right, so let's start with formal education. So when a child is going to formal education, this is a hard time for a parent as well because it's the release of their child to a place that's very unknown and can be very hard and challenging. So there's things that we can do to get our children ready, so more from the parent's perspective of what we can do to help our children, to increase their readiness to enter formal education. Obviously, they're not going to necessarily be able to do all of these things. If they can, great. If you're just working on them, great. If you've got them in the back of your head as things that you would like them to do, that's great too, because we understand that, hitting the milestones, hitting all of those things for our children takes a little bit longer, and so they won't be up to the same speed as what other children might be, and that's okay. So things like being able to dress and undress themselves, especially their shoes and socks for sandpit, having a communication need, whatever this may be it sign, PECS, POD, Prolo, Quotago, it's really important that we don't send our children to school without a way to communicate, because when we do, that's when we encounter behaviour issues. Having them toilet trained or in the process of, a lot of children will not be fully toilet training, but if you can make attempts to get there, make them aware of their body, recognize when they might need to go, or have a plan of attack where every hour the teacher sends them, and if they're really not ready, then have pull-ups ready for the teacher and that type of thing, and if possible, get them to understand how to change themselves. Obviously, if they're going to do number 2s in their pull-ups, they're going to need help. So it's just about giving them some strategies. If it's just a wee, then maybe they can change themselves with a little bit of help, that type of thing. Eating from a lunchbox, so things like opening containers, popping the straw in the popper, unwrapping muesli bars, that's all really good practice so they're not needing constant help, building that independence again. Having them be social with other children and the parent and the teachers, so just like interacting with socially appropriate behaviour. And a lot of it can be more parallel play, but do they understand that they need to keep their hands and feet to themselves, or not throw sand, or, when the bell goes to go back into class, that type of thing. Be able to greet others, even if it's through sign, hello, goodbye, or just a smile if that's where they're at. Separate from parents. So this is a big one if they haven't had any sort of daycare or any family daycare or visits to grandma's overnight, that type of thing. So separating from parents is important, because otherwise you've got a child who is very anxious anyway because it's a new environment. You will add on to that the separation from parents. That's just going to up their anxiety level a bit more, and you're going to see behaviours that you wouldn't necessarily see if the child had, started to have those separation steps. So you can do this incrementally. So things like, if possible, before school starts, have him visit a friend or a family member. And even if it's just 10 minutes at the beginning, building up the time that they might spend with such and such. So it might be half a day to the point where they can spend a whole day with someone. And it might be that you use family members or family friends, that type of thing. Obviously people you trust. And you do want to do it before school starts, because although schools can often offer reduced hours if your child is showing that anxiety and depression, we don't want that to happen. We want them to start off with full days in the mainstream classroom so that they're learning with their same age peers the schedules, expectations, and activities that are going to happen. And the last one is getting them to recognize possessions. So things like helping children to recognize their items, such as water bottles, hat, backpack, lunchbox, shoes, whether it's just popping their name on items like you can see there, or putting a picture on the items. Putting their picture on the items can help too. It just helps them to recognize and build that independence in them and reduce the expectation for the teachers. So we've created a prior to formal education checklist, so school readiness checklist. That's just a visual to help remind you of the things that are good to focus on or to try and ready themselves with, and that type of thing. Then obviously when choosing a school, it's important that we consider where we send them. So depending on if you're going public, state system, private, Catholic, Christian, there's lots of options when it comes to schools, but there is certain things that we can consider. So if you're going to be going to a mainstream public school, you will be assigned a school through your catchment. So where you live, the area where you live, that can be found at that website there. However, you can still apply for enrolment at a state school outside of your catchment, but that enrolment is not guaranteed. So in order for a school outside of your catchment to accept a student, depends on what the capacity of the school is. So obviously the students in the area get first pick of their school, and they have to leave a certain number of spots for children that might transfer into the area during the school year. It's very complicated. However, you can still apply. There's no reason why you can't still apply. There will be a meeting and that type of thing, and then you might just go on a waiting list. But if you're going to choose a catchment school, or you're going to go to one of the other great ones, the independent, the Catholic, the Christian, it's important to visit the school and consider certain things. So how your child is welcomed to the school. Is it warm and accepting, or is it with a bit of trepidation and uncertainty? And do they interact with your child? How school is currently approaching supporting children with additional needs at the moment. Not that the needs of our children are additional, they will be classified as that though. Do they currently have great programs in progress, that type of thing? Do they have an inclusive environment? Ask to have a tour around some of the classrooms and see if you can pick out the kids that might have the disability, quote unquote. They'll be the ones to decide and that type of thing. That is then a clue that maybe it's not inclusive. If you can't tell who the student is, that's great. That means they're being included in the age-appropriate curriculum and with their peers. Talk to other families. Facebook has opened up a wealth of options to us. Join local community groups, join the school community group if they've got one. Ask what the experiences of other families are, especially if you know of other families who might have a child who might require a little bit more assistance. See what their experience has been. Often the experiences of other families is the best indicator of what's going to fit potentially for you as parents. Do they use lots of visuals in the classroom and around the school? Is there yellow lines on the floor where, there might be a step, or, are the toilets do the toilets have pictures as well as words, like girls and there's a picture of a girl? In the classrooms, are they using visuals to support learners? That type of thing. And the willingness to work with yourself and the specialists. So a lot of schools won't, especially state schools, won't allow special therapists and that type of thing to come into the school, just because of legality and that type of thing, but they might offer things in place of that. So they might have their own OTs and their own speech pathologists and type things like that. Or they might be open to having yours come into the school as well. So, those are things to consider. And we've created a document. Is it the right school? Oh, let's keep going, sorry. So, is it the right school? Ask questions around accessibility for all the students. Are they expected to walk around the school a lot? Are they willing to make adjustments and modifications if a child is meant to be on a second story where they've got to walk up and down stairs every day? It's going to be tiring for our children. It can be hard for some of our children. So, are they willing to make concessions and maybe look at first floor classrooms? Safety concerns, so things like, is there a fence if your child is a runner, or how do they keep track of students in the playground, that type of thing. Communication, do they understand the communication style that your child is learning, and if not, are they willing to learn it or to upskill themselves? Are they willing to deal with the complex care issues that might be involved, such as toileting if your child isn't toilet trained? Are they willing to work with you on that one? Social interaction, so is the culture strong, where there's programs and assistance to give appropriate and intentional social skills, and that's done through social stories for the most part with visuals and things like that. Sensory issues, well, are they willing to offer regular breaks or quiet places for students who might require some space? And if needed, do they offer outside hours school care? Now that's an important one, because some schools, if you're not going to be able to pick up your child because you work or something like that, then you need to know that outside school hours is going to accept your child, because some actually say no. So that's important to consider if you need that, and to talk to the outside school hours people as well. So what is a good school? Because I get asked that a lot. And, is this a good school? Well, what makes it a good school? And my response is always, it depends on what you think is a good school. If a good school means that you're looking for the top academic results, but you might mean that you just want somewhere that's going to accept and best educate your student or your child to meet the needs of the diverse range. And that's what a good school is. I believe a good school is an inclusive school where one is welcomed and everyone is valued and everyone is seen as individuals, and it enables them to be part of a supportive community. I believe a good school is one where the culture is set of inclusion. It's not a practice, it's a mindset and a culture. So we created this Is It the Right School, which is available on our website, like I stated before. And feel free to go on and download it. It's just really some ideas behind what you can be looking for in if it's a right school. So that's the primary school one. So what can be some issues when we're transitioning to formal education? Things such as, for the student, things such as running, toileting can be an issue, anxiety, communication issues, separation anxiety can all be issues when we're transitioning to formal education. From the school standpoint, it can be just a lack of understanding, a lack of training, a bad mindset, so maybe not an inclusive mindset. Maybe we're doing the right thing by including them, quote unquote, but really it's not a mindset of everyone has a right to an inclusive education. Money and resources can often be an issue for schools, and just a culture that's not fully inclusive, or other parents don't want or have certain perceptions and stuff like that. So these are all potential issues that can happen, and there's a plethora of other ones, but these are some of the main ones that I come across. So how can we help with some of these things? So what are some of the potential solutions? So as stated before, making sure that if there's a transition program, which most schools, I think all schools do a transition program into prep, you may need to make sure that it's strong and it's intentional and it's purposed. They tend to be 1 to 2 hours in the morning of a certain day of the week, and they introduce students slowly to some of the aspects of school, like the activities that are going to happen, the different teachers that are going to be around, the classroom. It's usually fun and engaging, and it's run by the teachers from the prep year, and it gives them exposure to the classroom and the playground. If needed, there's the option of the reverse transition. This is something that some schools do. A reverse transition is where the staff visit the student in their current location. So it's good for students with high levels of anxiety and uncertainty. So it brings the teacher into their space, giving them more comfort. But obviously this depends on the school's policy around that sort of thing, because it is just more of a one-on-one interaction and takes a lot of time. You want to increase the interactions with the teacher, so slowly building up those interactions. So if you're attending a transitions program, you want to encourage your child to start going to the teacher and asking the teacher questions rather than you over the transition period. So if they're saying, why do we do that, mummy? You might say, why don't you ask your teacher that, and try and encourage that interaction between the two. And where possible, step back and allow for the natural social interactions to take place, whether it's between the teacher and the student, or your child and the other children, and that type of thing. We want to slowly remove the parent or guardian, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but sometimes it can be very hard for our students to transition. So often it's very relaxing, and it gives teachers a sense of calmness to have their parent there. So it might be that in the beginning you stay for a little bit in the morning just to settle the child in as a safety net, but it's important that you try not to so it's important that you remove yourself where it's okay. And then we want to step away and remove ourselves as possible. This might happen for several days or several weeks, but it might not need to happen at all. So we don't want to assume that we're going to need to be in the classroom and interacting with our children, but we want to be ready if that need arises, and not to just expect the school to do it because you are the child's safety net, and that's okay. Using visual support, so help create understanding, engagement, and reduce anxiety of the unknown. There's heaps of visual supports on our website, so just go and have a look there for first, then there's schedules, there's all sorts of things, choice boards, that type of thing. And then making a photo book. So if you're doing a transition, create a book for your child and take photos of especially if you know where their classroom is going to be and what they're going to look like. Take pictures of the room and the playground and the teacher, and then create photo books to revisit over the school holidays, because you've got to remember there's that huge 6 to 8 week block where the child will forget a lot of what's happened the previous year. So by creating photo books, especially of things that might have happened, so take action pictures while they're playing on the playground, take a picture with their teacher and their teacher aide, and just go through it with them during the school holidays at regular intervals, and remind them, remember, this is where you're going to be next year. This is what it's going to look like, blah, blah, blah. So that they have that to refer back to. Keep going. Potential solutions for transitioning to Formal education, so social stories around particularly the playground. The playground is an area where children struggle a lot with the returning back to class after play has happened, because often they're not finished playing and they don't want to go back to class. So letting them know that this is the expectation, you'll hear a bell, when you hear the bell you need to do this. And obviously less words, more pictures, and make sure the child is in the picture. Ensuring that teachers gain the relevant education or skills needed. So things like what makes them sad, happy, angry, calms them, do they have medical issues, what strategies would you advise, what incentives will they respond to. There's lots of organisations that offer services to educate individuals on aspects to consider. So for instance, here at Down Syndrome Queensland, we have lots of free webinars on understanding Down syndrome, communication, visual supports, that type of thing. But obviously, if a child's got a certain thing that they require and the teacher needs to be upskilled, then if they're signing, then we would say go to Deaf Services Queensland type thing. So just knowing where to go. Obviously, if you didn't catch it already, be intentional. So when setting tasks and giving instructions in the first week of school, make sure that you're building on their competence and their independence and creating students who understand and are capable of completing activities. You need to be really intentional about the activities that you give them, why you're giving them, so you're starting them off on the right foot. Have high expectations, so assume competence, give them regular breaks. And as a last resort, if a child is not settling into a school, is having major anxiety issues, or there's major safety issues, and I mean major, not just, they didn't comply. I mean major safety issues, like running across main roads or hitting, kicking teachers. The schools can do modified attendance programs where students come for a certain amount of the day and then go home, and you build on that to build them up to full time. This is absolutely a last resort, because all it does is set up our children to know that they can get away with stuff and know that that behaviour will lead to such and such, getting to go home early. All right, so what about within a school? So when transitioning within a school, one of the big areas that we find people struggle the most with is from the playground to lining up. But there's lots of other areas, so I think things like going to the library, going to sport or specialist lessons, even just moving from eating area back up to the classroom type thing. So some of the things that you might see are things like wrong place, wrong time, being in the wrong place, physical or verbal outbursts, running off, non-compliance with routine, being silly or disruptive. So what are some things that we can do to help? We can give them a warning. So often, especially in the playground, students have no idea when the bell is going, and they might be halfway through a game and they're not ready to leave their game. So there's been no warning. The bell goes, I'm not going to go. I'm going to lay flat in the sand, or I'm going to refuse to go, or I'm going to hit and kick if you try and get me. So things like giving them a warning, such as using a timer or verbal reminders for the teacher in the playground, can help students know the activity is coming to a close. There's actually watches you can get for children now which help with toileting issues, and you can put warnings in there for playground and that type of thing as well. They're really good as well, because then you're not relying on a teacher to remember, and especially if that teacher's away that day. But just to give them that warning that it's coming to an end, we need to start transitioning back to the undercover area or back to the classroom or wherever it is. So make sure you give them the warning. Use predictability, so making sure it's just predictable every day. So it might be classroom schedules and calendars so that students can see what's coming up next. And it's important, because our students are visual, that we include a picture and a word. If something's going to change within the regular routine, like there's a substitute teacher, there's no PE, there's going to be a fire drill, try to prepare the child for the change, either by giving their parents a call in the morning, especially if the regular teacher is going to be away, just so that they can prep their student, or create specific social stories for the child in that situation. Talking about social stories, use the visuals. So make sure they're personalized and specific to the student, and they include their picture doing the right thing. Expectation strips of expected and appropriate behavior, like how do I expect you to sit on the mat, sitting at the desk. Individual schedules that are specific to the student. Again, these are all things that are downloadable on our website, so go and have a look. Where appropriate, utilize their peers. So as stated before, our children are good at following what's going on around them and will mimic their peers. So utilize this to your advantage, especially if they've formed very strong bonds with certain peers and these peers are good choices. Have them follow along and go along with the peer. And what happens is that's peer tutoring. And what happens is that's one of the best ways to teach a child, regardless of whether it's academic or behavioral and that type of thing. Teach them a cue to ask for help. So it can be a secret signal between you and the child. By making it secret, you're allowing them to not have to draw attention to their constant need for assistance. So this can be a certain hand action, a word, or a position. It might be 2 fingers up in front of their chest, thumb on its side. They could just sit in place with their legs crossed, whatever you decide. Some people do a certain hand gesture or handshake. And it's just a way for them to get your attention without having to make it so obvious. Positive reinforcements. All students, all children thrive on positive reinforcements, whether it be a verbal affirmation, a pat on the back, a high five, a sticker, a stamp. Use this to your benefit, remembering that you need to keep your positive affirmations and negative to 5 to 1. So there needs to be 5 positive affirmations to 1 negative. This means you should be positively acknowledging all students 5 times before you broach a negative. Explicitly teach. So students who are new to the school are going to need extra time and assistance to learn transitions and may require being walked through them. Again, taking those photos, making those books. Explicit teaching on expectations in the process and what to do if they run into trouble. The one thing that we say is do not rely on teacher aides to assist during transitions, or the student will become dependent on them to complete the transition. Instead, focus on peer mentors and build that independence. So one of the areas I stated before was the playground. Playground is one of the areas that we get the most questions about from children not coming back. Or running. So one of the things that we say is to use other students as gatekeepers. So you're just one person, but in your class you've probably got 25 children. Therefore, you've got 4 other gatekeepers and models to keep an eye on such and such in the playground. And by simply just saying, hey, Susie, come back. You're not allowed over there. Susie's likely to come back and join back in. Consider the sensory issues within the playground. So playgrounds are often very noisy, very vibrant, especially around play equipment. So providing them a choice can help them. Doesn't mean that they can't be in the area. Might be that they play around the sandpit. So take the picture at the top. They play around the sandpit and the equipment, but they might sit and play with a sensory box instead, because that's just more where they're at that moment. So providing them with a choice but still including them in the environment is a good thing to think about too. Again, positive reinforcement, so powerful. Having high expectations and assumed confidence. Using social stories about where they can and can't go. So you can see down the bottom, this is a school who's created very visual supports for a student who was struggling with where I can and can't go. So you can see that with the green tick, she's in the picture, I'm allowed to go in this spot. So I think that's the library or the office. And the red cross, she's not in the picture, demonstrating to her that I'm not allowed to go in that space. And the last thing we talked about before was using a timer where possible. Those watches, they can be accessed by parents through NDIS and if you're wanting more information on those, then you can get in touch with me and I can find out more about those. All right. So changing grades, changing teachers. Sue Larkey, who is an expert in autism, has said that changing teachers is like moving to a foreign country for some children. So when I think about moving to a foreign country, I think that there can be anxiety about not knowing where to go, what to do, who to talk to. There can be language barriers, and this is true in our classrooms. Teachers will use different language between grades. The expectations in the classroom will be different. The approaches to education will be different, and the sounds, the smells, and the lights will all be different as well. So these are things that, as a child is transitioning from one grade to the next, we need to take into consideration that these are issues that can arise, and that even though they've been great in the first grade, moving to the second grade might be a real upheaval, and we might start to see some issues that might arise. So what can we do? We can help prepare students for the following year, even if it's just another grade in the same school. They might even know of the teacher, but we need to help calm nerves and reduce the likelihood of behaviour incidences. So as soon as possible, have the school work with you, or have the school work out who the next teacher will be. A lot of schools won't give you who the next teacher will be until the following year. In extenuating circumstances, schools will work with certain parents to try and make it a soft landing and try and transition the students early. So you might have luck with that. If you do know who the teacher is going to be, the school will hopefully have them visit the new teacher towards the end of the year. This might be during a relaxed subject like art, where, there's no high expectations, but they can get to know the look of the classroom, the smell of the classroom, how the teacher operates, that type of thing. It's important that we don't just send them alone, because that's going to raise their anxiety. So making sure they're with another friend. This can be someone who's going to be in their classroom the following year, but it doesn't need to be. Just someone who they like and get along with. And then as we get closer to the end of the year, increase their exposure to the teacher. So they're just building that confidence in themselves, but also the relationship between themselves and the teacher, and making sure that the new teacher is fully aware of all the medical issues, the academic ability of the child, the social groups, the behaviour concerns, and things like student profiles at a glance are really good for that type of thing. And as helpful as mums and dads are in this area of handing on the information, the teacher also needs, the former teacher also needs to hand it on, because how students behave in a school is very different to how students behave at home and the issues they have at home and that type of thing. So it's important for the teacher to be as explicit as they can be in giving that information to the new teacher as well. So this is an example that we've created of a student at a glance profile. It's a working document, so you can see that it's always being added to, it's being changed, it's being updated. Some of it's typed, some of it's written. There's a picture of the child in the corner. These are good not just for new teachers, but also like when you get supply teachers in, or non-contact teachers, teacher aides, or even to pop them in the playground folder so they start to understand the student a bit more. It gives students needs, adjustments, and goals, as well as ways to help calm them down should they start to show escalation in behaviour. There is a blank copy available on our website. This is just a copy that's been created. Obviously, for privacy reasons, we're not going to release that one. The other thing to do is to think about giving students some simple visuals of what's going to be the same and different next year, and this can help if you send this home. So a lot of students think that next year is going to be so different and it's going to be so hard and everything's going to change. But when you give them the visual of, the actual breakdown of what's going to change, it helps to reduce the anxiety in that they can see that very little is going to change. Most things are going to stay the same. So, for instance, I'm going to the same school. I'm going to have the same sort of lunch. I'm going to have friends. I'm going to playground. I'm going to catch the same bus. I'm still going to do maths, English, blah, blah, blah. Things that might change will be potentially the teacher, the classroom, and maybe where I eat lunch. So that's important to sort of use that as a visual reminder of things that, most things are going to stay the same. It's not that big a deal to change grades. Alright, this is the big one. So, from primary to secondary school, statistics show that students with diverse learning needs are more than 3 times more likely to drop out of high school and end up in special education units homeschooled, or just not getting an education at all. So why is this? Why do we lose, quote unquote, our students from the transition from primary school to high school? So some of the things that we need to look at when we're looking at transitioning our students is making sure it's purposeful, because transitioning can be challenging for the best of students. I remember when I moved to high school, I was petrified, and I was going with some of the people from my school, although I wasn't particularly friends with them. At least there was going to be familiar faces and things like that. But for a child with a disability, it can be extremely anxious, that type of thing. And it's about educating a whole new set of people about how a student operates and works, and what behaviour de-escalation issues or things that can help. So these transitions need to be even more intentional, thought out, and methodical. So within a secondary school, you're looking at things like a new environment. It's often a much larger scale. To give you an example, I think Kenmore State High School is 6 times larger than Kenmore State School and 3 times larger than Kenmore South State School. So they've been in these small schools, even though they might be big. They're going to go to a place that's 6 times as big, and they're going to be the little person as well, remembering that. There's lots more open spaces. There's a lack of playgrounds. There's often no gates. It's busier. It's noisier. I mean, that in itself is enough to send someone, sensory overload. It's a loss of familiarity. They might have lost some of their best friends going to different high schools, their teachers that they knew and loved, the safe spaces where they know they could go to if they needed help. And they really get this sense of, I don't know where I fit or how I fit. And there's that insecurity and that anxiety that arises. The other thing too is that once you start in high school, you've got changing and different teachers throughout the day. It used to be one teacher for 6.5 hours. I know grade 7 and 8, they keep the same teacher for like English and maths and that type of thing, but they've still got other teachers they've got to get to know, so they're looking at 4 to 5 teachers. There's higher expectations, so there's the expectation that they'll just look after themselves, that they'll be independent, they'll follow a schedule, they'll move around the school quickly, and with ease, which isn't necessarily the case. And there's multiple teaching styles. So every teacher's got a different way of teaching, and you just have to acclimatize to it. There's no consideration for the way that our children might learn. And there's more focus on the curriculum and less on what the child is. So when talking to high school students, when talking to high school teachers, they talk about there's a sense that they've just got to get through the curriculum because they've only got the child for 45 minutes a day. Whereas in primary school, you have the same students for 6.5 hours, so you can cultivate that relationship. You can spend time getting to know those students. High school teachers don't have that luxury. So then we end up with students who are overwhelmed, lost, anxious, disinterested, depressed. They've got a distaste for school. They've got a lack of understanding of what's actually happening. They're starting to use escapism, so they might stop going to school. They might start running away from school, that type of thing. And it all might just result in your student or your child refusing to go to school. So what's the easy answer? Move them somewhere where they get more personalized approach in a smaller learning environment. So things like that's where parents start to opt for the special school or for homeschooling. However, research shows us that this is not the best long-term solution for our children or our students. What it results in is future isolation from society, developing dependent behavior, and creating a lack of independence. So most parents, when you talk to them, will want their child to be independent and to be able to do things on their own and have friends and be considered part of a social group and that type of thing. In order for them to do that, mainstream, age-appropriate education is the best place for them. So let's have a look. I've probably scared you now. So the first thing we need to look at is it the right school, just like we did at primary school. So just like primary school, high schools have a catchment area. Check out your catchment area. If not, if you're going private or something like that, then there's other things to consider as well. So again, these are just exactly, most of them are exactly the same as the primary school ones. But you need to think about things like long-term. So what long-term offerings do they have for students? Do they offer courses where they're going to try and help them find work after school? Do they have extracurricular activities, so sporting events, or do they do Lego robotics, or they've got an art program, or they've got a drama program that's really specific to who my child wants to be, that type of thing. Because as they're getting older, you want to try and touch on the things that they love and try and build the independence in that area. Transport's another big one. So you might be a full-time worker and you might need to think about buses or trains, or are they going to get taxis, that type of thing. So making sure that you've got transport to and from school, and making sure that they've got a behaviour policy that's positive, that's not just going to pick up on the negatives and suspend and that type of thing. But when your child does show a behaviour, are they going to work with your child and help them to understand? And being open and honest. So you need to be open and honest with them about your child. Your child needs to be open and honest with them about their feelings, and they need to be open and honest about what they can do for you, what they can do for your child. If they don't have programs in place, ask them, because it's more important that you find out now before you enroll your student than after you've already enrolled and then you realize that they don't actually have ways to cater to your student or your child. All right, so we've got another list that we created. This one's the high school list or the secondary school list. So it's really similar to the primary school list. There's just a few differences in the in just considering post-school options and extracurricular options and transporting issues, or options, if you like. So again, available on our website. So preparing for high school, just like primary school, we can prepare for high school. So things like orientation programs, primary schools predominantly do this, but if they don't, you need to make sure that your child is engaged in an orientation program. They'll set up this sort of program in term 4 and help students, especially those who might have been targeted as needing a little bit extra support, to gain a better understanding of some of the things they might see here or that might change in high school. These programs are visits to the high school. They're interacting with teachers. They're seeing the classrooms. They might do some lessons there. It's usually sort of like a half-day program, and they come back to school and, talk about it with the other teachers. If possible, and if the school has a unit or something like that, taking photos again and introducing them to any potential teachers they might have. A big change for high school is a timetable. So working with a timetable at home is a great option, especially during that big Christmas holiday. This timetable can be many different ways. It can be color-coded, it can be picture, it can be just words, depending on the capability of your student, or your child, or your student. You might just start with one day and get them to work through a timetable rather than giving them the whole week. But working with a timetable is a really great option too. Thinking about transport and how they're going to get to and from school. If you're going to be using public transport, practice using public transport during the holiday with them, getting on and off at correct spots. A lot of, if you talk to the driver and make sure, try and find a route that has the same driver most days. Some of them do have the same driver, and therefore there's that consistency for them. Schools offer public transporting options as well. I know that our local private high school has their own busing system, so that's a great option as well. Getting them to build on their independent skills, like looking after their possessions, especially things like if they've got to change for sport and they've got to swap into their sports uniform, then, making sure they know to check what they need. And that might be a visual that you create. Again, look at our website. We've got options there. Are they self-toileted? There's lots less options in a high school setting for toileting assistance. There still is. But if you can get toilet training off the ground and, perfect that, that's wonderful. Again, eating totally independent would be beneficial. So as much as we can, and this is a readiness checklist, so this is a whole bunch of points that you can be working on. A lot of these are from the primary school list as well, and then just adding and building upon their capabilities. Obviously, when they get to high school, you want to really try and cultivate that independence, and especially, through the higher high school, so the senior schooling years. So, side note, independence, because all of this is very much, this is what we want our kids to do, this is what we want our kids to do. But if we're being honest, it's about independence, it's about creating independent learners, it's about creating independent individuals, it's creating competent individuals, and it's setting them up for life. So I just want to touch on independence because we want to make sure that as much as possible we're setting them up to succeed later in life, to be the best selves. So I talk to a lot of teachers, a lot of schools, and a lot of parents, and there's still this push towards a one-to-one teacher aid. And I just want to give a little overview of why we don't advocate for a one-to-one teacher aid all the time. Is there times when they're needed? Absolutely. Do they need to be there all the time? Absolutely not. To be part of an inclusive educational environment, research shows us that students need to be engaged with their peers and their teacher in age-appropriate curriculum. By providing a one-to-one teacher aid, we're setting them up on a path where they build codependent skills. They won't complete tasks without the assistance of their teacher aid, or they're just waiting for the teacher aid to give them their answer. They can become disengaged. They aren't going to interact, talk with, and explore to their peers because they know that someone else will just do it for them. They learn helplessness. So why would I bother to do something when I know someone will do it for me? This can be things like cutting and gluing and even writing. I know if I show I'm having difficulty with it, my teacher aid will take it off me and do it for me. They get surrogate communicators, and this is especially true for our children who have speech language difficulties. So they might let the aide just answer for them, and then they're not having to think about or create the verbal for themselves. And all of that ends up in a defeatist attitude of why bother and a reluctance to learn. So you can see how having a one-to-one teacher aid actually instigates that defeatist attitude, that lack of independence. However, if we provide students with quality differentiated teaching, modified work tasks, peer tutors and mentors, and the chance to be independent, we're going to have students who are engaged. They're going to be engaged in learning because they're following what's happening around them. They want to be part. They want to be seen like everyone else. They become self-reliant. They start to problem solve for themselves. They're more self-determined and social because they're interacting with their peers. And they're going to ask questions. They're going to be more inquisitive. So as much as possible, we want to create independence in our students. So when we're transitioning them in any way, once we've walked them through something a couple of times, we need to step back and let them have a go. So it means that they get personal freedom and the right to make choices about their life, as we all should. It gives them opportunities to succeed to the best of their abilities and desires. It gives them a chance to make mistakes and realize it's okay. Mistakes are part of life. It builds self-esteem and the belief that they have control over their life, and it builds a sense that people think that I am capable, therefore I'm going to show them I am. So what can you do? You can step back and use natural supports. Instead of giving them the teacher aid, use things like peer tutors and that type of thing. Encourage students to go to their peers first. So we'll encourage inclusion, understanding, respect, and camaraderie. Give multiple methods of communication. So it doesn't need to be answered in the same way as everyone else. They might use verbal, or they might use visual, or they might use signing, or they might need technology to answer and to communicate. Make sure the environment is of little impact upon them, in that it's not overwhelming, it's not sensory overload and that type of thing. Teach and reteach new skills and activities. one step at a time. So once they're competent in one step, then you can add in the next step. And by doing this, you'll actually see this will benefit all students and not just students with Down syndrome. Modify expectations and ensure that tasks are at a suitable level for students to be able to complete. Whether they're completing it independently in small groups or in a pair, success will breed a positive attitude. So as they succeed, they're more likely to engage as well. And be consistent. Be consistent with rules, be consistent with the expectations, be as consistent as you can with the timetable and the routine. So how can we at DSQ help? Well, we offer lots of things that we want to help. So our goal is to ensure that individuals are included in the same age curriculum in an inclusive environment where they are pushed and where teachers have a sense that they can succeed and will succeed. So we offer free webinars every month, and if you want more information about the upcoming ones, we've got our 2020 ones all planned. We have periodic educators workshops, so we've got a few happening now. They'll be available for download in the new year, and then we'll do some more next year as well. We have free phone consultation, free email information if you're wanting some of that. We do observational visits for behaviours and things like that, or we do whole school professional development, both of which have a cost involved. Check out our website. We have so many free downloads. We're constantly adding to it. You tell us what you need and we can look at making it. We're not going to make everything, but we can look at making it if the call is there. And just keep in contact with us and let us know how the process is going. I wish you all good luck as you come to the end of the year, and I hope that all the transitions go smoothly. But again, we're here if you need us. Alrighty. That's our website there that you can download, downsyndromeqld.org.au. And I have our reference list. So if you're wanting to look at some of the research behind some of the things I said today, absolutely go ahead and copy some of those down and have a look for yourselves. Otherwise, thank you and have a wonderful day.